Welcome back, everybody, to the Phillip Jordan Sports Podcast here on a Monday, starting a week out good with some good football conversation. And joining me from Last Word on College Football, I always love it when I have somebody from Last Word on College Football on with me. It's a lot of fun. When talking with them, we exchange messages. It's always fun talking to them. But anyways, I'm with Managing Editor Jason Rhea. And Jason, I appreciate you coming on the show. And we're going to talk some Oklahoma and all kinds of good stuff when it comes to college football.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Phillip. It's kind of crazy and we're really close to what we would think is the prototypical football season, but obviously we don't know how it's going to shake out. But yeah, I'm excited to be on and start talking about it.
Yeah, because I think this would be around where media days. We would be really dissecting what's going on with media days all over the country and SEC, Big 12. And we would have so many comments come from coaches. We would have predictions, not only from the preseason magazines, which we've got Lindy's, Athlon, they're out, but we still haven't got the field still is either about to come out. There's not been out long if it is out. We're used to that one being out for a while. Then media days, predictions from all these conferences. So it's kind of one of them things, and I go into it. You're hopeful that there will be a season, but it is kind of especially us that we write about it, we talk about college football. We're kind of wondering, will we have a season or not?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and it's one of those things that really just kind of evolve. It seems to evolve by the day, especially different parts of the United States. I think one thing that was interesting, Urban Meyer kind of came out the other day and said that he felt pretty strong that we would have a season, and I think one of the reasons was because he thinks ultimately most of the Power Five is going to go to conference only. I know Alabama's looking at trying to replace USC with BYU. I kind of saw that the other day, but I think I know there's obviously tons of opinions on this, but I think conference only, while that kind of eliminates a lot of great games that we have, Ohio State, Oregon is one that kind of comes to mind immediately. But I think it's the best way to really kind of contain it. That each conference can kind of dictate the kind of all of the rules and regulations in terms of, teams that are eligible to play based on testing up to 72 hours before. So I think if we get ourselves in a position where the Power Five, just at least the Power Five, goes conference only, I think that's honestly, Phillip, probably our best shot to start. Probably maybe not on time, but maybe towards the latter part of September.
Yeah, it's like I've heard like two separate things with that. It's either you could start on time, but then you could sprinkle in some more off dates for all these conferences, whatever they plan to do. Then you would just push everything back. With the Big 12, you look at the Pac-12, the SEC, ACC, the Big 10. Those are the Big 12 only has 10 teams. If those other conferences play a 10-game schedule, say they add enough conference games to get to 10, what do you think the Big 12 does? Because then you could say, look, this is a different circumstance. This is going to be a completely different year we've ever seen college football or sports in general, in our history of the world, really.
Yeah.
But when you get the Big 12 side of things, because there's only 10, so would they potentially play any teams more than once in the Big 12? I know they haven't really said anything, but just kind of what would you think the best scenario for them?
I can't imagine that they would play more than one team twice. I think if it comes down to that, I think from everything that I've kind of read and seen was a lot of the Power Five, the groups, the decision makers seemed to be together, and then kind of the Big Ten, new commissioner kind of went rogue and kind of made that decision. So I think I don't think that they would play a team twice. Now, I think you might see, I think you have to get to the point where all of these schedules are even, right? I mean, you almost have to have a 10-game season or a 9-game season, whatever it ends up being, for all of the Power Five teams. I think you'll probably see some of these teams where the schedule is not consistent, maybe play one non-conference game. It may be, something more, more locally. I don't know. It's, it's one of those things. It's so strange. It'll certainly be the oddest, I think, football season that we've ever seen. Maybe the oddest football season that we will ever see, at least in our lifetime, with everything so up in the air. But yeah, I mean, I think you would look to see some of those teams. Conferences have an even schedule. I think, a lot of the stuff in the Big 12. I know Oklahoma is actually looking at moving. They play Missouri State their very first game. I think they had the other day they had mentioned that they're trying to actually move that game up a week to give them a couple of weeks break, pending whatever the decision is for the Big 12. And I think they have really Oklahoma's committed to let Missouri State kind of use Oklahoma's facilities, really from a testing and a kind of a COVID protocol perspective. So I think Oklahoma is marching under the direction that there will be at least some sort of a non-conference season. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes up. If there's a couple of teams that add one non-conference game and just limit the the conference season to 9 plus that one conference game. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and you talk about the conference, non-conference game. Of course, the team you write a lot about, Oklahoma, that impacts them because of the Tennessee game, them and SEC. Yeah. It feels like I know Big Ten and Pac-12 have done say they're going only conference only, but I do feel like maybe the ACC, SEC, and the Big 12 maybe could still pull it off. Maybe if they're within each other, the bit Power 5, because then you have a little bit more confidence about what's in place inside there with testing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I know, here in the SEC, there's 4 crossover rivalries with the ACC: Georgia Tech, Florida State, Louisville, Kentucky, South Carolina, and Clemson. And I get a problem I have if a little bit in theory if they come out and say it's one of the reasons is travel,
right.
And you can at least maybe you can add on to this. Saying it's about travel, and you ask West Virginia to travel all the way to Texas
exactly.
and Kansas, that kind of doesn't make sense to me. But you can't, if you say it's travel, you can have them do that. Or look, SEC-wise, Missouri travel, they play in the SEC East, which they should be in the West. They would travel, I don't have their schedule in front of me, but potentially they could travel to Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, stuff like that. So that's kind of one of them things, too. It's kind of weird for me. If it's just because you want to govern what's going on with your conference, absolutely 100%. I just the travel part of it, I kind of find a little loophole in that if they come out with that excuse if they go conference only.
Yeah, I think that the travel part of it is very interesting, especially when you think to your point exactly around West Virginia. The rest of the schools within the Big 12 are pretty regionally located, but when you talk about Oklahoma going to Oklahoma actually travels to West Virginia this year on their schedule. So I think that's I think there's I think it's part of the thought process was just to keep it regional, but I think a lot of people they didn't put into consideration, Oklahoma actually travels to West Virginia and they play Tennessee in the non-conference, which it's in Norman, but that's it's pretty close, but it's not probably quite as far. I think the one thing that you'll see from Oklahoma actually was scheduled to play at Army this year. So I think that one will be tough. I think specifically because I think the state of New York has actually put in kind of a 2-week quarantine. Anyone actually visiting New York from another state actually has to quarantine for 2 weeks. So I think there would be some loopholes around that they would have to get around. But yeah, I think that the travel part of it was interesting. I think they probably could have used a different angle as opposed to travel. Maybe just kind of just really trying to keep it confined within the conferences itself to be able to kind of govern that a little bit tighter. Probably would be the better, really the better way to kind of go about it. But it's going to be crazy to see how it shakes up. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Big Ten and the Pac-12 obviously have already decided conference only. I mean, I could see the SEC or the ACC going conference only, and I could almost kind of see the Big 12 and the SEC, kind of doing whatever they want to do, type of thing. So I think that will be interesting. I mean, I think to your point on both sides, you have LSU and Texas in a non-conference game. That's going to be a big one, for both sides, just for playoff type of implications for both teams. You mentioned Oklahoma and Tennessee. That's one as well. So I think some of these teams aren't going to want to miss out on these big, kind of profile games. I think maybe Oregon's kind of a little happy, from their perspective. I mean, I think they're right pretty preseason top 10, for most people think about. So they're missing, they opened up with North Dakota State which no one wants to play them, obviously.
Why do you schedule them? Why do you even schedule them?
I know. So you have them in Ohio State, and I think back-to-back weeks. So I think they may be breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief this year. But yeah, from really from an SEC and a Big 12 perspective, they may still want to try to play those games if possible.
Yeah, it'd be interesting what we'll see. I know the SEC has said they would announce something, or maybe by the end of the month. So it's going to be interesting what all these other conferences what to do. Like I said, we know what the Big Ten, we know what the Pac-12 is doing, but the other three, let's see what happens with them. But let's talk about if we do get a season. Hopefully we do. I'm still trying to remain optimistic with everything. That's been my whole my push optimism. We're going to have a football season somehow, some way. We'll figure it out safely.
Yeah,
do it. But Oklahoma. And they're very interesting with them this year because they're coming in with a quarterback that's they're not going to have an experienced quarterback. It's going to be a different situation. Of course, you have Baker Mayfield, then Kyler Murray, then Jalen Hurts. They do return 8 starters on offense, but that's of course, great you have all 5 offensive linemen coming back.
Yep.
You look at the quarterback situation, it is a different deal with Oklahoma coming in this year. I guess assumed that Spencer Rattler will be the guy.
Yeah, I think it'll probably be the biggest surprise in the state of Oklahoma if Spencer Rattler's not the guy coming in. I think one of the things that was really a telltale sign that Lincoln Riley has really tried to refute ever since it happened, but the thought, Rattler was the 3rd string quarterback last year, and he was the guy that came in, after the game was out of hand against LSU. Last year, he was the guy that got that first, and Riley kind of said, if we would have had another possession, we would have put Tanner Mordecai in just to get him a feel. But, there's a reason why he put Rattler in first, to get some real meaningful snaps in a game that was obviously was no longer in question, but still high competitiveness, in terms of that game. So, yeah, I think like I said, it'll be extremely surprising if you don't see Rattler. And it's interesting, for everything that Riley has done really well, he's got a little bit of flack just in terms of being able to, the guys that he's recruited from a quarterback perspective haven't really panned out very well. Either they transferred or they really haven't had the opportunity to play. To your point, all 3 of the starting quarterbacks since Lincoln Riley has been here, whether it be an offensive coordinator for that year or in the last few years as head coach, he's had Baker Mayfield transfer, had Jalen Hurts transfer, had Kyler Murray transfer. So this will be the first guy that he recruited, one way or the other, whether it happens to be Tanner Mordecai or it happens to be Spencer Rattler. Then it's going to be a homegrown guy that he has brought in. The good thing, I think a lot of the concern last year with bringing Jalen Hurts in was he hadn't been in the system. This was his first year. He only had the spring and the fall, of course, but. And Riley did. I mean, I know you're very familiar with Jalen Hurts, from your area, but it was. I think a lot of people on the outside looking in, it was a bit of a miraculous what people think that he did with, Jalen Hurts in the short amount of time that he had him. So, Rattler, it was very important for him to have that year to learn under Hurts, and then just to kind of. Put himself in the position to take over the team this year. So, as you mentioned, 8 starters returning, a lot on the offensive line. They're going to return Kennedy Brooks from a running back perspective, back-to-back 1,000-yard season. He'll get majority of the reps this year. I mean, a lot of times what Riley likes to do is he splits the time within the backs. Typically 2 to 3 guys play a lot since he's been there. Whether you're thinking about Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon a few years ago, then Rodney Anderson, Trey Sermon, then of course Trey Sermon is off to Ohio State as a grad transfer perspective. So you look at that, you don't have anyone proven under besides him. So he'll probably get. I would say he would probably get 65-70% of the snaps. He actually looked into going into the draft, didn't like his position, so he decided to come back to Oklahoma. So I think it's a little bit different this year versus last year. Last year, there was a lot of question on the offensive line. Only had 1 starter returning with Creed Humphrey. This year, you got 5 starters returning. Plus, you got some really capable backups from a recruiting perspective. So, I think the offensive line looks good. The kind of the running back, and I think there's a thought. I mean, I think it's more reputation than anything. But you look at some of these preseason magazines and things like that. You have Spencer Rattler. I think he's number 3 in terms of the Heisman. He's never actually thrown a pass before. A meaningful, pass as a starter or a starting quarterback. So, that's a little kind of odd. One of those things. But I think the biggest question mark that you would see on the offensive side of the ball is really at the wide receiver position. They have a lot of talent, but it's a lot of unproven talent. One of their biggest recruits in quite some time last year, Jaden Hazelwood at the wide receiver position, tore his ACL early in spring. Kind of during quarantine when he was kind of working out on his own, he tore his ACL there. So not sure exactly if it's a full tear, partial tear, what the synopsis looks like. So, he'll be a big miss. Theo Weiss, who came in, was a freshman, played sparingly. He'll be counted on a lot. Charleston Rambo will be a big in his second year as a starter. We'll talk about transfers a little bit. This is a little bit more below the radar, but I think it's going to be really important. Theo Howard was a transfer from UCLA, grad transfer from UCLA. Before everything got shut down, he actually tore his Achilles, but somehow he looks like he's going to be ready for the beginning of the season, whether that be early September or late September. So, may have not been a full tear, because Achilles injuries are typically a bit longer of a recovery time. So, I think that's going to be the biggest question mark, honestly, Phillip, on the offensive side of the ball is really how quickly can Rattler and some of the young, unproven but talented receivers gel quickly, especially if you're looking at if Oklahoma goes only conference. They start with Baylor and Texas. Pretty tough. There's no getting your feet wet in terms of what that looks like. So, I mean, I think maybe more than anything, that's why Oklahoma might be pushing for that Missouri State game, really just to kind of get their to jail and kind of get that continuity going a little bit before they start getting some of the big boys in the Big 12 conference.
Yeah, in course with Lincoln Riley, Oklahoma's known for throwing the ball. I mean, even though, like I said, the running game has been there with Kennedy Brooks. But when you look at this team, maybe early on, especially if they get that game against Missouri State, maybe perhaps early on, maybe we could see a different kind of philosophy of Oklahoma. Get the running game going early before you try to set with a pass game. If you have inexperience there at quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Phillip. You definitely might see that, especially leaning on those 5 returning offensive linemen. I think one of the things as the season goes on, and to your point, I think they will lean on that a little bit earlier on, especially if they have the ability to do that with a non-conference game like Missouri State or Army, if that happens to kind of manifest itself. And I think one of the things, it was a bit of a struggle for, Oklahoma fans just in general. The backup quarterback's always the most popular guy on the team and in the fans' minds, right? So believe it or not, I think towards the back half of the season, there was a lot of clamoring to get Rattler in there, get him some opportunities, because Hurts struggled a little bit towards the back half of the season, taking care of the ball. He fumbled the ball quite a bit. He turned the ball over the last 4 or 5 games. He had 11 turnovers, whether it be from a fumble perspective. And then he really just struggled to get the ball down the field in conference play. So I think Riley changed that offense so much last year to more of kind of really a zone read offense more than anything. Sure, they threw the ball, not as much as they did, but they did throw the ball. But Hurts ran the ball quite a bit. I think he had over 1,400 yards rushing last year with all the the wishbone quarterbacks that Oklahoma has had over the years. Hurts was he had more rushes, more carries, and more yards than any of the wishbone quarterbacks. If that kind of tells you anything about the amount that he's he ran the ball last year. So I think you'll see Oklahoma have more of a prototypical what you would see under Riley type of offense. You'll see the zone read a little bit. Rattler can move a little bit, but he's not anywhere near the runner that Hurts is, and he is at least what looks like at this point. He is a better down the field throwing the ball. So I think, like I said, you'll see more of what you typically see out of Riley from a play calling perspective, more in the kind of the Baker Mayfield and the Kyler Murray role, if you will, kind of run, scramble to throw the ball downfield, not really scramble to run. So, but I think your point's well taken. You have a 2-time 1,000-yard rusher in the backfield. I mean, he's not. He's serviceable. He's not. He's not a great running back, but he's what he's really good at is really off the top, just in terms of breaking that first tackle. I think Oklahoma has run that kind of guard tackle play over and over again. So he's good as far as that goes. I think the one concern that you might have would be with depth if he happened to get injured. But yeah, I do think you will see Oklahoma, at least early on, rely on that running game just a little bit more.
Yeah, and on the other side of the ball, defense, and that's something I remember you were on the show the week or two. It was before the national the semifinal against LSU. And that's one thing we talked about. Which look, and everybody got on Oklahoma. I'm gonna stick up Oklahoma here. LSU ran the score up on everybody, so it was not just singled Oklahoma. But I know that was kind of some criticism there. But Alex Grinch did a good job last year with the defense. They went from 114th to 38th nationally defensively. Yeah. They did a good job getting to the quarterback and all that stuff. I think they were third in the Big 12 doing that. Turnovers, maybe that needs to be improved, but you are losing linebacker Kenneth Murray there in the middle, so that's a big loss to have there if he's going off to the NFL. What's your overall take? When you look at this defense, and can Alex Grinch kind of keep that trend going of improving the defense?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was interesting, Phillip, before last year started. When Grinch came in, from Ohio State and then Washington State before that, you hear about Oklahoma and you hear about the great defensive tradition that they've had at the school, and I think one of the things that I had heard, that he had talked about, he was absolutely shocked at the lack of talent that was in the building. So I think just being able to take what he had at that point and turn that around into the 39th, whether I can't remember what the number was, best defense in the country, was really just, I think, astonishing just in terms of what he was able to do. Yeah, we talked a little bit about the LSU game, and they didn't play well, but I think you almost, not to be kind of an apologist here, but I think you almost take that game in vain just a little bit. They had a couple of defensive starters that were out. Ronnie Perkins, Delaire Turner-Yell was out. Ronnie Perkins was out because of the suspension, the 6-game suspension that started last year, or in that game. Delaire Turner-Yell was their safety, who kind of solidified the back end for Oklahoma last year at that strong safety position. He had had a collarbone injury. Brendan Radley-Hiles, was out early in the game, first quarter, early second, for honestly one of the most deliberate targeting calls I've seen in quite some time against LSU. So they were out 3-4 defensive starters early on, and you play one of the, I know a lot of regional Oklahoma, Texas area doesn't want to hear this, but LSU, I think, was one of the best offenses that I've seen in a long time. I mean, you go, what they did to Oklahoma, put 42 up on Clemson, what they did to Alabama at Bryant-Denny, it's one of the most powerful. I mean, and then I think Oklahoma can attest to that, how the good offensive that they have had, and just one of the best offenses that you've seen from in college football in the last 15-20 years. So I think that's one thing that, so you can almost kind of give Oklahoma a bit of a do-over, if you will, with that. And I think one thing that's interesting, he's the one knock that you kind of heard about Alex Grinch was really from a recruiting perspective coming in last year. I mean, I think some of the things that I'd heard, he wasn't necessarily a great recruiter, but you kind of put took that with a little bit of a grain of salt, just in terms of the amount of importance that Riley has put on recruiting since he started his head coaching career at Oklahoma. For him to bring someone who's a little bit of a questionable recruiter would be a shock, and it's turned out that he's really been phenomenal on the defensive side. They signed 11 4-star, 247 4-star defensive players in last year's class. This year they have 12 recruits, 8 of which are on the defensive side of the ball at this point. So they've done a lot of good things in terms of recruiting and changing that in terms of what the defense looks like at Oklahoma. And then quickly, just one thing that I think was interesting. Oklahoma had about 8 players that have transferred out from this past year, and I think a lot of Oklahoma fans found that to be a little bit concerning. But some of what you hear is really what happened was Grinch and the defensive staff basically has said, you're not going to play a whole lot. If you're looking to play, we were basically enticing them to go elsewhere to free up scholarships for some of their other guys, coming in this year. So I think, as you mentioned, 3 starters that they're losing 3 starters on defense. Neville Gallimore from a defensive tackle perspective, who was really the anchor up front. He was kind of up and down. Last year he had his best season as a Sooner, as what you would certainly what you would expect from a senior. Really thrived in Grinch's 3-4 system. Kind of playing right over the ball. I think from a linebacker perspective, so they're losing one key player from each level of the defense. Kenneth Murray, who was really just he was all over the place. He started as a freshman, really struggled a lot as a true freshman, just kind of knowing where to be. This year, he kind of figured it all out. Was really just kind of excelled in that spot, really from a middle linebacker position, just knowing where to be, knowing the reads, making the calls out there. And then on the back end, Parnell Motley, who was really kind of up and down for Oklahoma in his career. A few years ago, had really good games against Ohio State, and then a couple of years ago, he got benched in the Oklahoma State game. And then last year, really, especially the second half of the year, he kind of came into his own. We talked about how bad, Oklahoma was just in general on the defensive side of the ball against LSU. But Parnell Motley was one-on-one against Jamar Chase majority of that game. He had 3 catches for 18 yards. So he was clearly the best player on that team on the back end, especially later in the year. So I think what Riley and Grinch have done on the defensive side of the ball up front, they've got 2 junior college defensive tackles that they've brought in. Number 1 ranked and number 2 defensive tackles. Perion Winfrey was the number 1 defensive tackle. Big, I think he's about 6 foot, about 320, 325. Is really kind of almost like an SEC type defensive tackle. Just from really kind of from a girth perspective. He's going to be counted on to come in and play immediately. He's almost going to have to be ready to play. Josh Ellison is another junior college guy that Oklahoma actually got. Was originally committed to Texas A&M. Oklahoma was able to flip him pretty late in the JUCO recruiting process. So one of those 2 things, there's a concern that maybe Ellison's not quite ready from a big time Power 5 FBS perspective to kind of play over the ball. So Winfrey might be one of those guys that plays immediately. And then you kind of look at the linebacker position. You have certainly Kenneth Murray is gone. You have really Deshaun White kind of came into his own. He was a freshman, played as a redshirt freshman last year. Linebacker coach Brian Odom said most instinctual linebacker he's ever seen play. So I think that kind of speaks to hopefully his ability to improve. Caleb Kelly, who was he played early, he played a lot of football for Oklahoma, had an ACL injury early on in the year and came back and played the last 4 games, was really a lot better than most people think. Even Grinch and the defensive staff said they thought he played a lot more and a lot better than they anticipated him coming off of that ACL and really just not playing a lot, obviously, due to the injury. So it'll be interesting to see who moves in the middle. I think most people think Kelly will kind of move to the middle, and then Deshaun White will kind of keep that outside position. But those 2 guys might be a little bit interchangeable. And then from the secondary position, they really got three positions that are ultimately up for grabs. Delarian Turner-Yell, will probably hang on to that strong safety spot. Trey Brown, who started the last few years at cornerback, probably hangs on to that. But then you got the free safety position, and then the nickelback position that might be up for grabs. There's a couple of JUCO guys, couple of freshmen, and then a couple of folks that were injured last year for Oklahoma that's going to kind of compete for that job. So that should be interesting to see. Probably the most competitive part of the team will be in that secondary position. That's where Oklahoma actually has recruited quite a bit. There's about 4 or 5 guys coming in that have the opportunity and potential to play a lot for them this year.
Yeah, and when you look at the team, of course, overall, Big 12, you would think, in my opinion, I think Oklahoma, they should be the favorite to win the conference. But it does look like Oklahoma State should have a pretty good team coming in, especially with Chuba Hubbard coming back, and they do have a lot of guys turning on defense.
Yeah.
Who knows? Texas up and down. Maybe no expectations. They'll be better than they were last year. Obviously, they didn't meet those expectations. Yeah. So when you look at Oklahoma versus the rest of the Big 12, who do you see as their big challenger, maybe can knock them off of the throne as the champion of the Big 12?
I think you hit it on the head, Phillip. It was interesting. The Big 12 media poll kind of came out with their predictions. We talked about that a little bit on the onset, that we didn't have the full media days, but the Big 12 kind of media, Oklahoma got 80 of the 90 votes, most votes that they've actually got, since within the last 4 or 5 years that they've won it for 4 consecutive years. So I think Oklahoma State and Texas are right there. You have Oklahoma State, they were the number 2 pick. Texas was number 3. A little bit surprising, just in terms of what Texas, has been able to do. Certainly a lot more hype than there has been, on the field, on the field play, especially last year. But I think, the trifecta of Spencer Sanders, Tylan Wallace, and Chuba Hubbard on the offensive side of the ball for Oklahoma State, probably goes in as the preseason favorite in terms of their best offense in the Big 12. Oklahoma, we talked about some of the question marks that they have unproven. They have 3 guys that are proven. They've done it, specifically Chuba Hubbard and Tylan Wallace. You have Spencer Sanders, who was a bit up and down in his first year at Oklahoma State, but you always see these kids make a big jump from kind of freshman to sophomore year. I kind of liken him a little bit to Bo Nix, which obviously you're certainly familiar with. Struggled a little bit from time to time from a decision-making perspective. Throwing the ball into tight spaces that can't necessarily do that at this big time level that you can at the high school level, and kind of almost like a baptism by fire. Started playing certainly a little bit better as the season goes on. So I think the big question with them is always, like it always is, on the defensive side of the ball. Can they get enough stops to to really challenge? I think I would say on paper, Oklahoma State's probably the second best team. But from a scheduling perspective, their schedule is, their conference schedule is fairly tough. They do come to Norman, to play Oklahoma. I believe they do play. They play at West Virginia, which is just kind of a tough game. They play at Kansas State, which is always tough. They host Texas. So I think, I think I would probably put Texas too, just because of, for no other reason, just because of Ellinger, coming back again. He's got, he doesn't have the same weapons. He's got a lot of new faces on the offensive side of the ball. But I think that kid, he's a gamer. He's a winner. He's a gamer. Until Oklahoma State's actually able to beat him, play good enough defense to beat him. I would probably still go with Texas number 2. Then you really, honestly, Phillip, you kind of have a big log jam, kind of past that. You've got Baylor, who played extremely well last year, probably overachieved a bit last year. A lot of defensive talent has left that team. You got Matt Rule, the complete coaching change on there. It will be interesting to see how they transition that. Rule did, just a phenomenal job in a few years of turning that program around. I think we remember that that first year that Rule came in, lost his first couple of games, won to an FCS team. So he turned that around pretty quickly, got a lot of talent, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. Last year there for them. And I think, like I said, you have Texas Tech, you have West Virginia, you have a lot of these other schools that are, really kind of in the mix, but I'm not sure if they're at Kansas State. Another one kind of comes to mind. If not sure if they're, going to be able to challenge, the top 3. But I still look at, like I said, Oklahoma, Texas, and then Texas and Oklahoma State kind of 2A, 2B, if you will. Maybe that home field advantage for Oklahoma State in that game will mean a little bit more.
Yeah, and home field is going to be interesting, as we were talking about at the beginning. If there's fans too. So
I almost forgot about that when I said it. Maybe home field doesn't actually mean anything anymore, because I can't. Some of the things I don't know what you're hearing from you're on your area from an SEC perspective, but I've heard a lot of things like 20-25% max is. I've heard anything from that, and I've heard anything less than. Just like immediate family might be able to attend the games, and it might. So I don't know. I can't expect. In any event, I can't expect there to be much of a home field advantage for anyone this year.
I think, and it's going to be very interesting. I think they're all going to be paying attention to what NASCAR's doing right now, because they had over 20,000 fans last week at Bristol Motor Speedway, and I do believe they're going to have other events with fans as well. So I think we may see college football and sports in general, the NFL, baseball, which they're starting back up this week. I think that's a big thing. People are going to watch what NASCAR is doing. How is that working with getting fans in and out, and how many fans, and that situation? I think that's going to be key, I think, for everybody in all sports, really.
Yeah.
So, so it'll be interesting. It's that does. Okay, I'm going to say something. The NFL, no fans. Okay, you notice it, but it's okay. College football needs the fans for the experience. It's a big part of the game. So, but I don't want them to put fake crowd noise either. If there's no fans there, just let it be quiet. I don't know. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about these sporting events putting the fake crowd noise in there?
Yeah, I think it's weird. I think for me, I think it's a little weird, and I'm with you. Maybe more than any sport on the planet, that the fan part of college football is what makes it great. It's what's part of the pageantry, of the game. So I think, I think it's inevitable. There's not going to be full crowds this year. I think we all know that no matter what happens, there's not going to be any capacity crowds at any of these stadiums. But yeah, and I've watched a few things. It is. I know there's not a whole lot of sports back up yet. I know that baseball started their summer training a couple of days ago, or maybe it was last night was the first night. Watching some of the highlights, it's a little weird seeing. But baseball, sometimes you see some of these stadiums, that aren't very full anyways. So
they're used to it.
kind of used to it. But you go to we look at the fall and you see Baton Rouge, or you see in Auburn or Alabama or Oklahoma, Texas, you see 15,000 fans. It's it'll be a really big culture shock, I think, to everyone really watching the game, and probably the kids playing, obviously playing there as well. Certainly they understand kind of the gravity of the situation, but yeah, I'm like you. I think the artificial sound, maybe that's kind of more of a professional type of experience that I think in the college game, I agree with you. Just kind of let it be silent or not, maybe not quite completely silent, but quieter. I mean, I think it'll be just kind of weird if it's like that.
Yeah, I agree with it. I heard of one baseball game. I saw some highlights and they had it. I'm like, that just because I know they're not there. That's the
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Lastly, that we're at 40 minutes and I've kept you probably a lot longer than I thought I would. So I'm going to kind of jump on the recent article you had over at Last Word, which was talking about the impact transfers coming in. And of course, at the top of the list, not go a whole list because I want the people to go read the article. And if you are a podcast listener right now, not the live video, but if you're a podcast listener, I'll have that article in the description in the podcast. So if you want to check out the full article, you can do that by hitting that link that's in the description. But of course, number one, you got Jamie Newman. That situation. I mean, you was talking off air that now after the article came out, you had a new situation with the JT Daniels part of it. So, and look, with Georgia, you in a normal year, if this was normal, no pandemic, you would say, well, Jamie Newman has got a leg up. He went through spring practice. He's been practicing with his teammates. Yes, he's had to play a bit longer now, but with JT Daniels coming in, I mean, I want to say this. I think Jamie Newman will be the quarterback. But with the situation we are in now, I don't think it's as cut and dry as it probably normally would be if they had a full on spring practice.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, Philip. I think like you said, we talked off air about the change in that just after we kind of released that article. You know, for Georgia, I mean, you're a lot closer than I am, but this has to be deja vu for Georgia fans just thinking about this. This is, this is Jake Fromm and Justin Fields all over again, right?
And Easton was there. I mean,
Easton that's true.
Fromm comes in. It's like Kirby Smart cannot get away from these competition with highly talented guys.
Right. And I think, I mean, nationally, and I think Georgia fans specifically nationally, I think Kirby, may have mishandled that a little bit, given the year that Fromm had last year, then also given the year that Fields had, one of the best years, just from a proficiency perspective in college football. But I'm with you. I think I would say from the outside looking in, I think Jamie Newman probably has a little bit of a leg up just in terms of what he can do both with his arm and his feet. Specifically last year at Wake Forest. But I think one of the things that Kirby Smart and team has to think about, back to our discussion about conference only. If it is conference only, Georgia opens up with Alabama. Do you want who are you more comfortable? I mean, it's not about who you think is maybe not earned the spot, or who's been there the longest. Like, who do you think? I mean, it's obviously both of those teams have playoff aspirations. You're probably going to see both of those teams in the top 5. Without a doubt, when the polls come out. So if you go travel to Alabama the very first game of the year, which is, I don't know, I mean, that's a tough call for both sides right there. But I think that'll be interesting if that happens. But yeah, I think if for no other reason, what happened previously, I think Smart may lean towards the guy that can do a little bit of both.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. You had a couple of SEC guys, or former. Jake Bentley was one. That's one I'm intrigued by. And Utah, and of course, Felipe Franks going over to Arkansas. Can Felipe Franks regain that magic he had toward the end of 2018 when he threw 24 touchdowns? He ran for 7. He looked like he had turned a corner.
He did.
And then last year he gets hurt against Kentucky, and then Kyle Trask takes over, which, a lot of Florida fans wanted that to happen.
Yeah.
They wish, like you said earlier, the backup quarterback is always the favorite person on the team. So interesting names there, but like I said, everybody needs to go check that out. That article, great article done by Jason over at Last Word on College Football, as we have many great other great writers as well. But Jason, like I said, we're at the 45-minute mark. I do appreciate you doing this, coming on the show today to talk all things college football. It's great to see you. We've talked many times, had you on the podcast before.
That's true. You too.
Anyways, if the listeners want to follow, listeners and viewers, I'm forgetting to say viewers, but if the listeners and viewers want to follow you online on the work you're doing, where can they find you?
My Twitter handle is for Last Word on College Football is @JasonRhea1.
right, good deal. Go give Jason a follow. And Jason, once again, I appreciate the time, and I hope we can do this again sometime down the road.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Phillip.